right, welcome everyone to the meeting tonight. Thank you for your participation. What we want to do is please review the agenda. I know there's a lot of, there's a lot of information that you were emailed with things that we're going over. So we gave you kind of a heads up to kind of read all the material prior. We sent that out on an email. But what I'd like to do now is kind of go over what we did in the previous meeting, just so you remember what we talked about, and kind of we'll move forward from there. But I want to start off this meeting because we had two people that were not on the meeting, but they were away doing special things for their works. And now that they're here, I want to do a big shout out to Chief Chris Skinner for his getting nominated for the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police, him getting that title. He's here, he's back here now. So he has another cap on his head. And then also Sergeant Smith, she got an award with the accreditation. So I just want you to know that we brought it up while y'all were away, but I want to bring it up while y'all are here, that it means a lot to us that y'all got those awards, because as you get more responsibility in doing these things, it means that people around recognize what you are doing. And it's not, I guarantee you that a person who is not on the ball would not be getting on any type of position where you're representing all the chiefs of police. So give yourself a hand, and we support you, and we appreciate what you're doing. So everybody kind of hands.
It is a big deal.
It is a very, very big deal. Before I go any farther, we might have some public comments. Are there any hands for public comments, which is an opportunity? If anyone from the public has anything to say, we give you a couple of minutes to speak. Are there any hands out?
I do not see any hands.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and continue. From our previous meeting, the main thing that we talked about was domestic violence and sexual assault presentation. And I believe we had probably, in my opinion, a very intense, a very informative meeting. We had attorney Lynette Boggs Perez, who's one of my older sisters. She's a deputy prosecuting attorney in Little Rock, Arkansas. She did a presentation. At the same time, it was accompanied by Sergeant Jason Barrett, Detective Annie McIntyre, and then we also had our Deputy District Attorney, Kyra Stanley. I love the collaboration. I love the conversation, and I believe that these are the type of conversations that, as we go forward and dive into any of the subject matters, I like to see collaboration from another aspect, another place, to have a Southern perspective on how they handle, and then to see where the similarities are, and also to see what some of the best practices. She left the meeting, having done it, with great ideas from you. And hopefully we got some information from her. So that went very, very well. Next, we're going to move on to liaison reports. I will start off with Commissioner Lemon. Scott?
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, thank you very much. So coming out of the Human Rights Commission, it's actually a bit concerning. So we were seeing a very low incidence of bias and hate crimes, but this last month counted for 8. So that is more than we have received this entire year, just to put it in perspective. So of these cases, one of them has been adjudicated already. It's a bias crime that occurred on 16th and Arthur on March 28th and involved a female activist with the Lakota tribe. And it is an open case, but it's been assigned. And there was 2 illegal burning downtowns related to the Spectrum Bar. The owners have an impression that they know exactly who these juvenile offenders were that were honestly arsoning Spectrum Bar in the alleyway, because there is a prior history involved. Five of the cases involve intimidation and assault. One was at the downtown pizza restaurant, Broadway, and Sizzle Pie, downtown Eugene. And they made flyer gestures with the little gun symbol involved, which is very threatening. They also used anti-Arab slurs, even though there's no relation to that at the business. So there was an arrest there with an intimidation 2 charge. And then there's 3 cases that are related to harassment over the telephone. So one of them was at a downtown hotel manager, had a patron came in and yell that, why are we putting up this unhoused person, which is now a protected class in Eugene, and basically threatened to murder this person. So the suspect has been ID'd, and it's an active case going forward. I'm so sorry that there's so many updates to give you, because I really wish there wasn't. So another case, there was a house that was egged. It was the house of a daughter who is part of the LGBTQ community. And the mother thought it related to that. But after investigation, they realized that it was more interpersonal and it had nothing to do with the hate or bias. So I think that one's about to be cleared off the books. And then there was so most of the cases are from the Spectrum Bar, but there was one serious assault. It was a female activist with the Lakota tribe. I think I already mentioned it, but this seems to be the most serious. But when we're talking about trends, we've gone from 1 to 2 to 1 to 8. So that is something that the Human Rights Commission is very concerned about. And I thought it was very important to bring it to you all. So from 1 to 8 over a month.
Commissioner Lemon, right off the bat,
yes.
I have to say this. I am so happy that you are the representing the Human Rights Commission, because in 2 meetings or whatever amount of meetings you've been in, I've learned more things that's going on with the Human Rights Commission than after being on this commission for over a year and a half. So right off the bat, the way you're digging, the way you work, the way you share what's going on, because here's the bottom line. The chief needs to hear what's going on. We don't need to hear about what's going on in the world. We need to hear about what's going on in Eugene. So between me and you, I'm telling you that I want to thank you for what you're doing as far as your job, because that's what this commission needs, not some agenda or anything else. We just need to know what's going on. So regardless if it's good, bad, or ugly, your presentation, I commend you right off the bat. Now, the next thing I want to say is, when all these things are happening, are the police, are you sharing it to the police? Or how does it, what's the next thing that happens after that?
So actually the police liaison comes to the Human Rights Commission for about 15-20 minutes to give us an update on human rights abuses. And that's my job to report the human rights abuses to you. It all goes to the HRNI department, Human Rights and Neighborhood Initiative department. So that's where I get my reports from. But I also get the reports from the Eugene Police Department and their liaison to the Human Rights Commission.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Michael Haynes Garcia.
Yes. Hi. So the Civilian Review Board had a field trip this week instead of our normal meeting. We had a tour of the or the CRB got a tour of the oh, I can't remember the name of it, but I believe it was the evidence evidence room. Is that a thing? In order to sort of understand how that works. I wasn't able to attend, which is why I'm unclear on the details since it was in person. But I understand that it was useful. And there we go. Thank you, Beatrice. The Eugene Police Department Evidence Control Unit and Forensic Evidence Unit. And so, yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
The council has mostly been working on middle housing code ordinance, the outfall of HB 2001, and we worked through that yesterday. In part, I kind of got a preliminary hit as to where we're going with the council, so that staff could bring back ordinance language by next Wednesday, when we think we're going to take final action on that. That's been taking up almost all the time of the council, but that'll soon, we'll move on from there. I'm on the steering committee of the ad hoc committee on police policy, next steps. And we met with Councilor Ye, Jennifer and I met with the staff, and we were working through kind of the process of getting us through all those different types of recommendations that came to us from the committee, and kind of trying to get them. Some of them are easy to deal with, and we can implement them quickly. Others are more complicated and take a lot more time. So we're working through that process with with the city manager and the police auditor, Leah, who's on here as a guest, and also the Judge Gill. So we're working through that process. It's a kind of a slow process, but it's an important one to get right. As my former colleague Chris Pryor said, you can have it cheap, fast, or right, but you only get two. We're trying to do it right, and it's not going to be fast. So that's all I got.
Scott, did you have a question for Councilor Zelenka?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. So Councilor Zelenka, I was actually on the equity board for the HB 2001 Middle Income Zoning Equity Commission.
Yeah, good. Thanks for doing that.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Thanks for doing that, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very happy to. So I saw in either an email chain or a radio thing that certain things that the equity board recommended that are related to law enforcement and other things were kind of dropped. And I would just ask that the city council make their decision-making process more transparent and ask stakeholders and people that have been in this process so far what they think about changes before they're made. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know where you heard that, but nothing's been dropped yet. So I think that was premature.
Oh, I'll absolutely apologize for that. I think it was on the radio. It was something about affordable housing, parking, and height limits and stuff. But
yeah. Well, so the big Chair Box, can I have another minute or so?
Go ahead.
The big big four issues for me were parking incentives, lot coverage, and building height. And on parking incentives, there were parking incentives for duplexes, for example. It's for duplexes, triplexes, quads, townhomes, and cluster homes is what HB 2001 does. So for instance, with duplexes, there was an incentive that if the building that was to be built was near transit, meaning a quarter mile from an MX stop, the builder had the option to not include parking. And so that was approved. And then there was another incentive for parking, which was related to small homes of 900 square feet or less. And that was not approved. So you still have to provide parking there. Then there was another third parking incentive for affordable housing. And that was approved. That one's a little bit more complicated because one of the things I argued against that was because the reason, I mean, it does lower the cost of the building, but it puts low-income people that are in that affordable housing potentially in a very tough position as we shift towards electric vehicles. That's going to be, if you don't have a parking space, how are you going to charge your car? You're not going to run a car up a wire across the sidewalk and charge your vehicle. So
sorry to interrupt, but can we focus on police commission business, please?
Yeah, and so those are the equity things that were happening there.
Okay, I apologize, Sean. Councilor Zelenka, can I follow up with you over email?
That's great.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Mogart.
Thank you, Chair Boggs. Just been super busy. I know I'm not doing a liaison report, but just busy with doing the campaign season stuff for the City Club of Eugene and my own personal time, just trying to keep my head above water. So that's it for me.
Commissioner Shivers.
Yeah, so I want to thank the Eugene police for their quick apprehension of one of the groups of folks who are out stealing catalytic converters, because mine was one of the ones stolen. I know there are still other groups out there. I've seen them active, and I know the party issue over in the college campuses is another place that's probably top of mind for a lot of folks. I'm concerned about UOPD for a variety of reasons, and I would love to know more about their role or what they're doing to actually support in those sensitive cases where we do have a lot of U of O students.
Great, and we might be hitting on some of those under the chief's comments. So, but that's a great question, Commissioner Shivers. Commissioner Wynn. B.
Hey there.
Hi.
No particular comments, except I just wanted to also congratulate Chief Skinner on his, being now the, I think what I heard was that you are now head of the Association for the Chiefs of Oregon, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Congratulations. That is really awesome. All right, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Dominguez.
Okay. So just general comments. Basically, I've been going to the Citizens Academy, and I learned some things that are going to feed into a report that I said that I was going to do. So I have more research to do to add to it. That report being about tasers and how technology gets adopted and what the procedures are, or who is in charge of that. And by the way, I bought the book. So if I return the library books, if you want to read that book, here it is. So it's interesting. And also last Saturday, we visited the jail, and that was pretty interesting. that's connected in some small way to a protest that I went, I think it was on Tuesday, for like abortion rights and stuff. When I was there, I had heard somebody say that I guess they'd gone to the jail and at some point they were in a cell and I guess they were bleeding, like they started their period and they didn't get like any kind of pads or help. I wish that that person would reach out to me just so they can get like the full story, because as far as I can tell from the visit to the jail, like they apparently have everything on hand for women in periods, and seemed like they were pretty willing to help, and like they do rounds every hour according to them. So I just wonder what the full story is. So if you're out there, please reach out to me. And I believe I got the contact information for one of the people that works there, so we can get to the bottom of what happened there. What else? Yeah, so I have that report that I have to do, and if I forgot something, I'll think about it later and I'll do it during the closing comments. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. And if you do get anyone reaching out to you, can you make sure that information is forwarded to me? Because if there's someone that needs to know about this, I might be able to find who needs to be reading that. Because that right there is kind of troubling if what you just said is found to be true.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis, do you have any comments?
No. I do not, but it's good to see everyone.
Great to see you as well. Okay, I have a few things, just a few things as far as what my comments are. And one is just to let you know. So I was asked by the mayor and her people to, she gave me 13 names with the CRB, and I was to pick the top 5 out of reading the resumes and so forth. So that's something I've done this past week for her. And then, let's see here. 2, I recently, well, just a couple of days ago, I got the email that I was chosen as a person to be on the board of directors for Sponsors. Sponsors Inc. is an organization that deals with reentry and so forth. So I was chosen to be, I was one of five people chosen to be on that board. That does not affect what I'm doing here, but that's adding to my plate. But as we're looking at, as I look at policing and so forth, it also, I like to be a person who's helping the other side of things. So folks, when they're coming out of jail and becoming a productive person, finding ways and reimagining justice is what they say. I'm glad to be a part of that. Next, I want y'all to know that our next meeting will be here. So we will be meeting live, and we'll be meeting here, and we're still working out more of the details, but I look forward to seeing everyone, and that's that. And then, and also on that meeting for June 9th, we'll be having our officer elections for chair and vice chair. So you need to be thinking about if you're interested in being either the chair or vice chair, be thinking about that. And if you have any questions, we can go from there. Just so everyone knows, I will be running again for chair. So if someone needs to get me out this seat, that's fine. Just put your name in the hat. And then we also have vice chair, and I don't know, I believe that the vice chair might be running again, but we just need to know, because our next at our next meeting, the first thing we'll be doing is going over elections.
We just got started, Chair Bog, so I will definitely be running again.
Okay, right. So thank you there. So next we have our chief's report.
Thank you, Chair Boggs, and good to see all the fellow commissioners. Let me give you a little bit of update on kind of what's going on here at EPD, and then we can talk about a couple of things that maybe are on your mind, and I can address some of the challenges that we're facing out operationally right now. So First off, I just want to start with some gratitude. As much as I appreciate you guys recognizing my presidency at the of Oregon Association Chiefs of Police, the one thing that will be that I'm looking forward to, aside from trying to set some direction for the association, is that I'll be the president when we start the long legislative session in early 2023. And that will involve me spending a lot of time up in Salem testifying in a variety of different ways. And I think that's really impactful from the perspective that Eugene can kind of lead from the front on some things. And we can be seen as that model agency. We're not perfect, but we can be seen as that model agency about how we're attacking how 21st century policing should look, and what kind of reform types of strategies that we can kind of give examples of and speak to at the state level for other agencies to potentially replicate if their communities are asking them to do that. So I think there's some real advantages of that. But more importantly is Julie Smith, the amazing Julie Smith, who accreditation is one of those things that's a really, really heavy lift. It basically validates every policy we have in our book with proofs to show that we're actually following the policies. And then where policies are somewhat outdated according to industry standards, we have to make those adjustments very, very quickly. And when Julie started, she started shortly, she started in the fall, and she asked me, she goes, "Chief, what would be your perfect outcome?" And I said, "My perfect outcome, Julie, would be that we have accreditation done and we're receiving our certificate in our spring conference in Bend in April." And I knew that that was going to be a heavy lift, and probably not a huge shock to you guys to learn that she did exactly what she needed to do with the help of Linda Phelps, who is an amazing volunteer for us in doing that. So really, Julie Smith is an absolute rock star. She makes me look really smart every single day for making that decision to bring her back. So thank you, Julie, for that work. We're hiring. Big shocker. We're hiring every single week. It feels like we're down 20 police officer positions. We're trying to hire 13 CSOs. We're down positions in evidence control. We're down positions in records. We're down positions in dispatch. We're hiring in every facet of the organization. We're constantly recruiting. We're constantly going through a process, and we're constantly trying to make decisions about good applicants and getting them through background, and in some cases psychological evaluations, so that we can give them start dates. So that's going to be, you're going to hear that from me for the next 36 months. We're going to be in a state of trying to hire the right people to be a part of the organization. So we'll continue to do that. We are, as a city, trying to establish, what are the strategies to make us really competitive in this very difficult labor market. And so that's a citywide initiative. And more specifically here with our recruiting team, Sergeant Kara Williams and her group of recruiters, they're getting really creative on how we get the word out and outreach to people to get the right people to test with us, or to at least choose to test with us. This weekend is yet another testing. We have the written and the physical this weekend, and successful candidates from that will go to the interview portion. And so we're hopeful that we have another group of candidates coming through the pipeline this week. This last week, I met with 7 different individuals for a chief's interview. That's the final stage before I either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down on moving forward to the psychological and a conditional job offer. Of the 7 individuals, I passed 5 that I think are going to be a good addition to the team. 2 I passed on. And so I'm hopeful, if the psychs go well, that we'll have at least 5 additional police officers to chip away at that deficit of 20. But remember, all 5 of those have to go to the academy and get through training before they're even going to be eligible to help us out in the street. So, it's a long process, and one that we continue to be challenged by, but are committed to. So we're moving forward with that. I'll just briefly touch on some of the events that have been taking us away. There's been some really great police work that's happened. There's been some cases that we've made some great investigations. We've had some really, really good, impactful investigations come to a close at the DA's office with some really dangerous and violent individuals and abusive individuals that have been adjudicated through the DA's office. And so that's just really good work by our folks. And then we're also plagued with the ongoing types of things we deal with around, some of the university district stuff that's happening. We've had those 2 weekends where we were called, to deal with hundreds and hundreds of people that were enjoying their newfound freedom of gathering and partaking in alcohol. And one of the challenges we have is in both of those instances, the housing where this is occurring is an off-campus, we know they're mostly students, but it's off-campus property. So it's our problem to deal with. And we're horribly outnumbered. In the first instance, there was 500 or so people, and we had 10 officers. So at 50 to 1, there's not a lot we can do other than just try to get people to behave themselves as best we can. And then the second one this last weekend, over Mother's Day weekend, we had 4 officers out there for about 200 people at this particular residence. That's been a problem for us for years, quite frankly. And mostly we go into those situations really just asking for compliance and saying, hey, let's disperse and break this stuff. If it's small enough, then we just have them, hey, button it up inside and keep quiet enough to where your neighbors aren't calling us complaining. But if it's so big that it's spilling out into the streets, blocking traffic, it's on neighbors' lawns, there's beer cans, there's trash, there's people urinating in people's bushes next door. I mean, there's just a variety of those types of things. People call us and they're just fed up. And so we ask people to disperse and say, hey, it's time to break up the party and leave. And in most instances, people are okay with that. They understand, okay, we had our fun. It's gotten out a little bit out of control, and they do that. And then in a few instances, people really push back and choose to behave in different ways. And that's what we've seen the last couple of weekends. So again, I don't want to paint all party goers as those bad apples. It's like anything else we do. It only takes a few to ruin it for everybody. And quite honestly, that's exactly what we saw over that Mother's Day weekend. Is a few people that kind of ruined it for everybody. The downside is when we have officers in danger, we have an officer punched in the face and is ultimately on the ground with somebody as a result of that assault. That call goes out for help. And when that call goes out for help from an officer being down or an officer needs assistance, then you can imagine everybody in the city that's working that night is headed that direction. And while that's a good resource to have, knowing, and I've been in a situation where I've needed help, and there's nothing more comforting than hearing a siren getting closer and closer and closer when you're fighting for your life in some respects. Not to suggest that was this situation, but I'm just talking to you about a situation I was in. The downside to that is that we're pulling all those resources from other people that need resources in the city. Mm-hmm. And so that activity, and I'll just call it that selfish activity of letting a party get out of control, negatively impacts everybody else in the city and the 50 square miles and 180,000 people that are also asking for us to at least be present in their neighborhoods, deal with their issues, come and take their report or help them find some victim services around an issue that they're having. We have to be able to suspend that for a short period of time. And it's not fair to the rest of the community when things get out of control that way. So I get every once in a while a little bit of criticism around, both ways, right? I get it. I can't make everybody happy. It's both ways. It's, hey, don't you have something better to do with your time than chase a bunch of party goers? And all the way to the other end where it's like, why don't you just arrest everybody and take them to jail? That'll stop them from partying. And I think we can all agree that neither one of those extremes are the answer for what we're trying to do. But the one thing that I will always default to is I'm never going to put officers in harm's way by asking them to do something that they're ill-equipped to deal with. And when you have 10 officers dealing with 500 people, they're ill-equipped to deal with that. When you have 4 officers dealing with 200 people, they're ill-equipped to deal with that. I'm never going to send them in there to make arrests where I feel like it's going to jeopardize their safety. And so that's why I very rarely am satisfying those people on one end that say, I think you should just arrest everybody that looks at you sideways. Never going to satisfy those folks. So, and that's fine. I'm not going to, that's not my job is to make sure everybody is their own personal agendas are being met on how police services are delivered. Conversely, I'm also not going to just completely walk away and ignore those people that have called us and that are being victims of this in this neighborhood, where they're just fed up and tired and they just need somebody to advocate for them when it comes to breaking up these parties. So we'll continue to try and thread that needle, you guys. It's never perfect. Everything's dynamic, and we'll do the very best we can to it's a good segue into one of tonight's conversation, to completely go in with the posture of de-escalation first and foremost, and only resort to enforcement when we have to. And again, as always, it's the best laid plans of everything sometimes seem to go sideways when we're dealing with this many people that have been drinking, this many people that have maybe making some poor decisions at that particular time. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we have some questions. Commissioner Davis.
My question was something unrelated to this right now, so I'll save it, but thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lemon.
Thank you. And actually mine are a bit tangential as well. So I'm wondering if I should save it. Will Chief Skinner be around for questions later on?
Yes. Commissioner Wynn. Commissioner Wynn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Chief, you didn't mention the ethnic breakdown of the candidates. Are you seeing more minority applicants? Because Bonnie, myself, and I think Dallas met in February with Officer Peckles and Sergeant Williams to talk about how we could, give the recruitment team some assistance in spreading the word. I had suggested a flyer that we can then use to help advertise to all contacts and to social medias. And it would be great to get us that flyer if hiring is ongoing and more minority applicant is desired. So I'll let you tackle the first question anyway.
Yeah, the last couple of recruitments actually have been really, really encouraging as far as the numbers. The key though, V, is people apply through the city system, which is called NeoGov, which is kind of the entry point to say, hey, I want to apply to be a police officer. And that's where we gather some of the demographic information to help us know kind of the diverse candidate pool we have. The piece that we're still working really hard on is that going from choosing to apply to actually choosing to show up on a Saturday to take the written test and the physical fitness test, we're losing a lot of candidates. So we could have 75 people apply during a cycle for us, and it's not common for us to only have 40 or 45 people show up to take the test. So we're making personal phone calls to people, reminding them and really encouraging them to show up. And so I'm hopeful that will help, but we're losing a lot between the intent to apply and then the lack of follow through of showing up and actually taking the test and the physical fitness. So, but the candidate pool on the front end is starting to look really much better than it's been in a long time.
Okay, thanks. It sounds like you don't want people who don't, follow through anyway. No matter how rough the diamond might be. I mean, there's certain limit to that,
We might absolutely find a couple of real some gems in there, but I don't want to have to talk somebody into into showing up that day and testing if their heart really isn't in it.
Right.
But we also know people are busy, and sometimes that little extra personal touch might actually do the trick. And so we want to take that effort.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Shivers.
Yeah, so it's not, I don't think, on our work plan, our 2-year work plan, and it's certainly not on the agenda today. But the reason that I brought up the UO incident is because we have I've heard it called a Vatican City within Eugene, where we have a police department that complaints aren't routed through the auditor. We have no oversight over. And yet when something like this happens, it is EPD that gets on the hook for when incidents go south. So I'm very concerned about UOPD and their ability to be an effective organization, especially with their what I would consider latitude that maybe shouldn't be there. At the very least, I would love for the auditor to take complaints about them so that we can complain to UO about it. And I was wondering your thoughts specifically on that. And I know you'll probably have to walk on eggshells around it, but
Sean, I appreciate the comment. It's always delicate when you have a jurisdiction within a jurisdiction. That's the way Lane County is, right? Eugene is a jurisdiction within a greater Lane County jurisdiction. The problem is we just have a fully developed process by which we understand where the rules of engagement are. The University of Oregon is a little different because those boundaries are there, but they really, really are very hazy around, we dip onto campus to help them. The Taylor shooting a couple of years ago is a great example of that. We did that entire investigation because they don't have necessarily the capacity to handle something like that homicide. And we were, luckily we were able to make an arrest in there and get some justice for that family. And conversely, they'll drift outside of their jurisdiction and help us out if we're in need on the fringes of those types of things. I think one of the opportunities upcoming is they're trying to select a new police chief for that. I have not been involved in that selection or consulted, but I'm hopeful that what I get out of that is a good partner. Mm-hmm. So we can have these kinds of discussions around kind of rules of engagement and how we support each other for mutual aid. I may never be able to speak to the auditor relationship with the UOPD just because we don't have any authority over them, but I am able to say I will work really, really hard to foster a good and collaborative relationship with the new leadership over there so that we can be a little bit more in lockstep on how we approach things.
Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you.
Give your hand up.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering if there, actually, when the new chief gets hired, maybe it could be added to the student manual and the, not that the students read the manual, but they hand you a manual when you go to the U of O, and they have like this big event where like all the new students are introduced to the U of O and they like get spat out into all these little cohorts, and then like they tell them like what's what with the U of O. And one of the things that maybe a conversation could be had, even if it's really brief, it's just like, and remember that when you're having the parties, just so you know, if the police is called, you're actually preventing people from getting services from the police. So please, like, acknowledge that in some way. Like, I know it seems kind of silly, but I feel like maybe if they heard it, like, I mean, they're college students, so maybe they'll kind of remember it. Just an idea. It could be brief, but yeah.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do whatever outreach we need to do to get compliance. I mean, that's, I'd rather put some effort towards prevention so that we don't have to respond. What I will say is that we have a really good relationship with their Office of Student Conduct. So when we have specific students that are really, like the guy that punched an officer in the face, he's an enrolled student at the University of Oregon. They get those reports, they get the information they need, and then they have some administrative functions they can go through on their end around student conduct. And so they've been really good about that. I don't ever hear the outcomes, the administrative outcomes, which I'm not sure I need to, but I do know that we liaison with them quite frequently around student conduct. And so I think that's a good thing.
Okay, yeah, that would be really cool if they actually did that during the intro. Yeah, nice.
I'm gonna get right to you, Commissioner Zalika. I'm gonna take this opportunity to ask a question. When they have these type of parties where people are getting knocked out, there's lots of people involved in this, the party happened somewhere. So you have an address as far as the address where they're happening. Is there a visit? Is there a letter mailed to someone basically saying you had a party that got out of hand? In the event that you do this party again, you will be sent a fine or some type of consequence, because if you're not hitting someone with what would prevent them from not doing what they did again? So either a visit by someone in law enforcement, a letter from someone in law enforcement. Is there something on the books that this, if a party gets to the point where people are calling and so forth, you have an address where that party's at? So what is the consequence? Because there's no consequence, there's no solution.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely a consequence. The city council has an ordinance on the books against, it's a social host ordinance against unruly gatherings that allows for us to levy civil fines on both people that hosted the party, so say people that are on the lease that are throwing the party, as well as the property owners, especially if it's multiple violations and they've been warned. So in both instances, I think the base fine is $375. And so in this particular case at 1376 Ferry Street, we have both actually happening. We have people that hosted the party that were given citations at night and levied fines, and will have to go to court to show cause why they shouldn't be levied those fines. And because of multiple calls for service at that same residence, we're also pursuing levying fines and penalties on the property owner who's been made aware of his problem tenants for our community. So in both cases, we're following up on that.
And the $375 fine, what is that from years in the past? Where did that number come from?
It's set in ordinance. The bail amounts are usually set based on comparable data from around the area and or the state. I mean, anytime we have a new ordinance we put on the books and we know that we need to levy a fine, the court generally will be able to help us understand what the fine amount is that's reasonable for that particular offense. So, and I don't know if the city council actually, I'm guessing they ultimately approved not only the ordinance, but the fine details. But my guess is there's some work that goes into how you kind of land on a number that seems reasonable.
Yeah, that was actually my ordinance. I can speak to it if you want, Chair Boggs.
Yeah. Go. Well, why don't you go ahead, Councilor?
So I worked with several groups in the areas around the university to deal with what were called party houses. They were continually the same houses doing over and over again. There was one in my neighborhood, it's called the Rugby House, and they just were this rugby club, and they just kept passing the house down, and they were just completely unruly. The neighbors had it. And so what we needed was a mechanism to get some accountability to folks to be able to deal with that issue. So the way that we structured that was that in the first incidence, you get the $375 fine. We work with the city council can say whatever they want, but it's up to the judge to determine what the fine is. So usually we work with the judge to determine that. I remember once when we wanted to have the parking fines around the arena during basketball games to be like $100, and the judge said, no, twice 18, so 36 is the most you can do. And we went, oh, okay. But you work with the judge to come to that. The second time that it happens within a year on that same property, then they have to pay, I think it's half the cost of the police response, which can be literally thousands of dollars.
Correct.
So it goes to 375 plus the half cost, and the letter goes in each instance to the landlord, and then in the third offense, the landlord has to pay half of that fine. So when we did that, we hardly ever saw parties happen twice in a particular residence. They shift around, but they don't happen in the same place. Because as soon as we got that accountability, ratcheted up the fines, and then had the landlord get involved, that really did have an impact. to violate that ordinance, by the way, you have to have, I think, 2 or 3 of a list of about 5 or 8 things that like minor in possession and noise violation. There's several things in there. So it's not just unruly parties. So it's multiple things that have to be going on. When Bonnie brought up the intro packets, in the before times when we actually could go meet with people, we used to go out in pairs of each counselor and a vice president or the mayor with the president. And we used to go door to door and meet kids and hand out those packets. And in it is a, here's what the host social horse ordinance does and says. And I swear 99% of the students that we talked to on those, they already knew about it. They knew exactly what it was because the grapevine worked like that. And there also is a whole bunch of things about drinking responsibly and all the things that you were talking about, Bonnie. Those things are already in there. I believe we don't do the door-to-door anymore, but they still get that packet. It may have less of an impact because nobody dropped it off at their door, but it's part of the system when they get inducted into the U of O as well. I had one other thing, Chair Boggs, on the auditor. So the Leah's on here and she probably knows the story better than I do. She was involved in it, but when the U of O Police Department was coming into being years ago, there was a big discussion about how they should be formed and what they should be able to do, whether or not they should have guns. They didn't initially, now they do, how much authority they had, and whether or not they should have an auditor, and whether or not they wanted to be part of our auditor system so they didn't have to replicate that. At that time, the U of O chose not to have an auditor system or be part of our auditor system. I know Mark, and I think Leah is probably doing the same thing, has liaisoned with them multiple times about how to deal with issues and complaints without them having a complete auditor system like we do. They have yet to, become part of our system or replicate it. But that's also, same story is true for City of Springfield, and they don't have an auditor system either. That branch has been put forward several times, maybe it's time again to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Lemon?
Thank you, Chair. So this question is more for Councilor Zelenka. So at this point, when we're talking about this, I'm actually concerned about public safety. So I know that people who are throwing a party, if they end up calling the police or the paramedics, are not responsible for whatever ends up coming out, and that is preventing overdoses, preventing deaths, to be quite frank. So I'm wondering what the impact would be if there's limited to no communication, and if the EPD is showing up to parties and arresting people when they are trying to save people. And then secondly, and very smallly, I would just say that from my friends at the University of Oregon, which I'm a recent graduate of, even though you are not going door to door, that message is still being put out, and every homeowner or renter certainly knows it. They know the rules. The University of Oregon is very good at putting out the rules, but I'm more concerned about public safety, and I wanted your opinion on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood your first part. Are you talking about when fire EMTs go to deal with people and then the cops show up and there's potential complication?
No, thanks for asking, because I want to make sure I'm clear. So basically, if someone who is throwing a party or someone who is at a party calls 911 and says there might be a potential for alcohol overdose or other overdoses, the host is not responsible, the caller is not responsible, because it's out of public safety. And I just want to make sure that that's still the policy. And if EPD shows up to shut down these parties and arrest people, is that going to harm the whole notion of harm reduction that we've been trying to do?
Let me,
Well,
let me see
I would
if I
say-
can take a stab at this one. So first, I appreciate the question. First of all, I think one of the things that I have that I'll push back just a little bit on, Scott, is when you in the same sentence say show up to shut down and arrest people. Those are mutually exclusive things that could happen. We're not arresting people every time we shut down a house. We gain more compliance from people than we have to issue citations. And in very few cases, people are not going to jail when you think about getting arrested. They're just getting a citation and they're not taken anywhere. I mean, we don't have enough jail beds for bad guys and bad girls, let alone people that are partying. So that would be one thing. The other thing I would tell you is if a call came in from the party saying, hey, we've got somebody that's either overdosed or doing this, if it's an overdose for a narcotic, like most of our overdoses right now, which are an opioid or fentanyl overdose, you want a cop to get there fast because we can deliver Narcan to that person or EMT. But in some cases where it's like alcohol, we have somebody we're worried about and we think they drank too much. EPD is not going to those. That's a fire and EMS call. That's non-criminal. That's not a safety risk. ESF, Eugene Springfield Fire, is better suited to be able to do that. And so we're happy to, stand by in the event that the firefighters or the paramedics, EMTs show up and this crowd starts to gather around them and really give them a hard time so they can't do their job. We can create safe passage for them, but we probably won't respond to those, Scott. And so I think you can feel good about making sure that medical attention is the core of what's going to happen. They're not us trying to go in and shut down a party. So,
although I've heard of parties trying to be unruly and actually give the EMTs a hard time when they're trying to save someone, because kids out of control on drugs and alcohol make stupid decisions sometimes, and I've heard of that happening as well. And I think the chief made a good point. They don't really arrest people. I think, one of the last ones we had last year, I think there was 21 citations. I don't think anybody went to jail. This guy that slugged the cop went to jail, but that's just above and beyond stupid. And most of them are unruly behavior and, throwing bottles at people and cops and just really, really dumb things that people shouldn't be doing are the things that warrant citations. And it's also not uncommon actually for the house person who owns the house to call the police. That happens actually more than you think, where they say, we threw this little party and then there's all of a sudden there's 250, 300 people here. And we're like, what the hell? And it's completely out of control. So it's not unusual for that actually to happen, where it just, the grapevine's great, works really well. And so those people they still get the social host ordinance thing, but they get a little bit of leeway. It's the folks that are reticent to, participate in the shutting down of the party, slam the door, lock all the doors and windows and say, nothing's happening here, when it's pretty clear. Those are the kind of the dumb decisions young people on alcohol and drugs make. But also, almost all of the parties eventually get shut down without too much intervention by the police. When the police show up and then they show up in enough force, it's just a matter of time before everybody goes, oh, the cops are here, let's go. And the parties calm down. Sometimes when it's 500 people, that takes a lot longer than when it's 50, but.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying, Councilor Zelenka. My main concern was just making sure that if someone calls the police on a party, that they don't have to worry about reprisal, and it's about public safety. So I really appreciate that clarification, and I think we're in the right direction. Thank you.
In reading the paper, what I saw, and Sean, I think you know about it. The description was that the mayor said that what happened to those police officers was not to happen no more. Okay, this went beyond a party and college students will party. Where do we forget that you cannot have a responsible party? Now, you say, well, the homeowner or the person that owns the place has there's no concept, there's no responsibility. So my point, and I just need to find out where the policy is, or we need to, this is something we need to be put in on a work plan or so forth, but I'm pretty sure that the mayor said that that type of party was unacceptable. So then when I see $375 in second letters and so forth, maybe that needs to be revisited because, example, and I'm gonna use, I don't know what the number is. If that were $3,700, not $375, how likely would you be having large parties knowing that that's the tag that you'll be hit with? So these are the type of questions we need to review. Do we have any more hands up?
Yeah, just Chair Boggs, so that the amount is sort of up to the council, but not really. It's up to what the judge thinks is reasonable. No matter what we set as a fine, the judge can do whatever they feel is reasonable. All our ordinances actually say up to, and so that gives the judge leeway in how they deal with that. And we've actually had that conversation about how much should we actually charge them the first go around. And maybe there needs to be a tiered system where there's, it's completely outrageously out of control compared to, slightly out of control.
Right.
But that's a judgment call and it's very subjective. There's also some, I believe, I'm not a lawyer and I don't know this part of the law, but my recollection is there's also some personal liability that people who hold parties have if people get killed or do other things after they've been served. And believe it or not, at the first party, there were parents there.
Yeah. It's something that needs to be addressed.
Chair Boggs.
We're gonna be moving on with our de-escalation policy. I know we could be talking about this subject matter till the wee hours of the morning, but we just need to move on. So on the de-escalation part, the de-escalation policy, Sergeant Julie Smith will be discussing some proposed changes. And on as guests, we have from our training division, we have Lieutenant Angie San Miguel, welcome. And then we have from our crisis negotiation team, a Sergeant Brandon Rafji. Hopefully I said that right. And then we also have from our ad hoc committee on police policy, Betty Davis. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and have Sergeant Smith get us right on the de-escalation policy.
Thank you, Chair Boggs. I'm going to kind of go through the some of the information of why this specific policy was brought for revision. Essentially, we started looking at this. Part of the role that you've kind of heard is that the chief brought me back for accreditation purposes. And during that process, I have to identify policies that need to come up to industry standards. And so this was one of the policies that we needed to incorporate. House Bill 4301 that was from the 2020 session. There was a couple aspects to the House bill that we needed to incorporate into our de-escalation policy. And one of the aspects was the requirement if under ORS 161-233, prior to using physical force upon a person, the peace officer has a reasonable opportunity to do so. The peace officer shall and give reasonable warnings of use of force. And so if you look through the policy, we incorporated the actual verbiage from the ORS into the policy. So that was one of the first aspects of why we started looking at this policy. we also obviously had to bring it up to accreditation standards for yearly training. We looked at it for DEI and gender inclusion. And then I also took feedback from not only the community, but some of the crisis negotiation team, the defensive tactics team, and the EPD training division to incorporate some of their concerns from the policy, and then also from the community. I looked at the ad hoc committee recommendations and tried to incorporate aspects of those recommendations also. And so the product that you see before you, or that you all had a copy of, tried to incorporate all those aspects.
Before I go on, we have a guest here. So Betsy Davis, do you have, from the ad hoc committee, do you have any concerns, or do you have anything you'd like to bring to the table?
Well, I don't want to waste your time. I know you're running over.
No, we're fine.
I heard the focus of changes, and so I may be behind the 8 ball here. I don't know, so please forgive me. Oh, I should say, Osio Tahiji, how are you? I'm Betsy. I was part of the ad hoc committee. In policy 820, I only had one version. I have not seen the revised version based on the newest changes, but in the city council's matrix, where they put how they were sort of addressing the ad hoc committee's recommendations, and those two don't meet very well. But it said that 820 would be viewed relative to the Oregon Revised Standard of, I think it was 161915, which is defining justifiable use of force, which I thought was strange to pair with the de-escalation policy. But there was also 161275, which defines entrapment. Has the policy 820, according to the city council on their action matrix for 820, those were the two things that the policy would be reviewed and revised to be in compliance with. Has that been done?
That's a great question, Sergeant Smith.
Well, I can tell you that entrapment doesn't fall within the 820 de-escalation policy. So
neither does defining justifiable for use of force. So that was a bit confusing to the ad hoc committee as to why the cities would mention that as the action taken, and it said it would be with the police commission. May I ask, in the revised version, the version I saw, which again could be way early, it started out with the assumption that officers would reasonably use de-escalation techniques, but immediately after that was a sentence about, however, if there's imminent threat, there's the expectation that you will use reasonable and decisive force. Is that still in the first paragraph under policy in 820?
I don't believe it is written in that format when I'm reading the paragraph here.
There were only two sentences in the draft I saw. The reasonable, trying to use de-escalation techniques. And then the second sentence was imminent threat and decisive force.
If I could cut in here for a second.
As a matter of fact, Commissioner Shivers, your hand has been up for a moment. I know you're bringing something to this conversation.
Yeah, to answer your question directly, Betsy, that second sentence has been removed, though the objectively reasonable standard is a pretty common standard. It is not very penetrable for, I didn't understand it very well when I first joined the police commission. And the reason I raised my hand originally is because many of these statements further limit when de-escalation will be used. So specifically, B begins with when practical and appropriate, which I feel is redundant given that it's already under the objectively reasonable standard. And G, which should consider a disengagement plan when the benefits to be gained by police intervention are clearly outweighed by the risks associated with the call. Again, always would be too strong, but objectively reasonable is a pretty reasonable, sorry, no pun intended, a reasonable metric by when de-escalation will be used. And the practical and appropriate and should consider, to me, watered down the policy to such a level that I'm no longer super happy with it. Additionally, section E, an officer is not expected to employ de-escalation techniques that could jeopardize the safety of the community or any officer. It sounds great, but I don't want to paper over the fact that we are asking our officers to put themselves in harm's way to protect our community and to protect even the people that they are arresting. And to say that we never expect them to employ de-escalation techniques, even when it jeopardizes their safety, I think is not accurate. I think we are asking them to do exactly that, because the way to resolve any issue would be, engagement with immediate force from surprise, every issue, and never engage in de-escalation at all. And we're just not doing that. And I don't think we want to do that.
What I would like to hear on this, on those things you just said is, can we get Lieutenant Angie San Miguel, who I guess she is in charge of training. So how are you training the policemen? And this is a difficult subject matter.
Yeah, so we incorporate de-escalation training into almost all of our training. So we incorporate it into our defensive tactics training. There's always a component of de-escalation, even when we're doing scenario-based training. We're constantly talking about, ways to position yourself and approach a situation that gives you the best tactical advantage, so you don't have to go to force right away if things go sideways. We do a lot of training regarding crisis intervention on dealing with all sorts of people and all sorts of crisis, and under different states of being under the influence. So de-escalation training really is interwoven into almost all of our training. And, we, of course, still go over policy and procedure regularly as well, so that they know the verbiage in the policy and they understand what that verbiage means.
Is there any hands up, any questions? Chief Skinner?
Thank you, Chair Boggs. I was just going to add a little bit to Sean's comments. I think it's important to recognize that he just read the first sentence of E, and he didn't read the entire part of E, because the rest of E says the immediacy of a threat or the need to take immediate action to prevent death or physical injury may foreclose the utilization of de-escalation techniques by officers.
Which I think stands on its own, right? It's just the first part I have a problem with.
Right, I understand that, but the first part, if you want to take the first part out and just say the immediacy, I mean, it basically says the same thing, and I think we can all come up with situations where de-escalation is not appropriate. And if you disagree with me, then we can talk about the number of, for instance, domestic violence assaults that we go to where the assault is actually in progress, where somebody is getting beaten, that we have to intervene on. So I think it's important to for me anyway, to kind of fully understand what is the intent behind each one of these bullet points. And I don't disagree the fact that it feels watered down when we say when practical, when appropriate, those types of things. I think what's always difficult is how do you write a policy that leaves just enough space to make sure that officers know that their safety and the safety of others is paramount. And so if it's, and I agree with you, it's their safety, it's victim safety, it's the assailants or the suspect's safety as well. that's a difficult needle to thread when you're trying to create some latitude. And that's everything we deal with on this commission at this policy is kind of like hoping we have a perfect scenario for a perfect policy to be applied to. And we all know that that just goes sideways sometimes. So.
Commissioner Lemon? Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is kind of where I actually have more questions than answers. So first of all, I would have to say that objectively reasonable is quite a lot of latitude. It's very interpretive. I would prefer, and I'm sure the Human Rights Council would also prefer, to see a blanket policy that's informed. And then for my second point, I need to bring up the notes that we were sent. So under 820 3.1 de-escalation techniques, I'm worried that we are holding police officers to be psychologists, psychiatrists, and crisis interventionists at the same point. And yes, cahoots or the CIT team should be included when necessary, but they don't have the resources to do so. And also, because cahoots is, you have to go through the non-emergency number, a lot of people are very scared of calling cahoots, afraid of getting a police response when they don't want it. And I don't think that this is a burden that should be put on police officers or on commanders. I think that we need to think of this holistically. And this was just my general impression of this agenda item, but I think it merits further discussion. Thank you.
Betsy?
Oh, thank you. I had to figure out how to raise my hand. You guys are much faster at the draw than I am.
We put in the work.
There you go. LULAC's concerns with policies are not meant to weaken or threaten the lives of officers, obviously. But when you speak of de-escalation, there are levels, and I do believe entrapment does have something to do with it, because if an officer, and this is not all officers, and I do not want them at risk for their lives, I get the need for use of force at times, but officers can take steps away from de-escalation, right? Steps. And they're now starting to escalate. This can allow the citizen, they're going to escalate. And what point does that become entrapment? Because if the officer takes steps towards escalating, and to me, they are related. And to me, policy 820, you've got policy 800, use of force. There's a gap between those in terms of officer behavior. And entrapment falls in that. And what point? And I think the police commission should really consider ORS 161275, entrapment. How are you going to incorporate that on both sides of that gap? That officers know you can't sort of goad people into an escalated response that will then give you the right to see imminent threat so that you can use of force. I think that's a concern. How is that dealt with in both sides? And we believe that there should be some explicit language, and please forgive me, you may have revised this, and if so, just tell me. I'm looking at a draft response, but the ad hoc committee thought there should be some explicit information to set the context for police officers in a de-escalation policy. That there should be some context of, nonviolent interactions that don't go to use of force should be the expectation of police officers unless there are observable threats, right? I get that. I'm not saying that, but there should be some way to tell officers that, de-escalation techniques, if it is feasible, should be exhausted
Mhm.
And there should be some indication in policy to officers that if you do not exhaust de-escalation and it could reasonably have been done, you could have used all of those before you moved, that there will be disciplinary issues. Now, it doesn't have to be firing the officer. We're not asking to fire officers, but some kinds of watching of officers that if they don't exhaust de-escalation techniques before just moving, if they do that entrapment march between 820 and 800, which we've seen happen in the community, then there are some disciplinary actions. And first time, a note in your record. Second time, we'll sit down and have a talk about de-escalation. Maybe you need to go through more training, but there needs to be some indication to officers that we're watching you as a department. Yeah.
Thank you, Betty. And I get it. 100%. I hear you that your concerns are de-escalation needs to be exhausted. So I got it loud and clear. Can we get Commissioner Shivers and then Chief Skinner?
Chad Boggs, Betsy, if you go to our website and look at our agenda for today's meeting, it has the new policy in there.
Thank you.
I also posted a link to our agenda in the chat.
Thank you very much. I was not sent that before this, and so that is helpful. But if the question, because I don't want to continue to take your time.
No. You don't have time. And Betsy, just so you know, we all appreciate you speaking to our commission. That's number one. Because if you don't speak to our commission and you have a concern like you do, then we wouldn't hear it. So thank you for your time. But we need to move on, but we staying on this. This is another thing that we could stay on this till the end of the meeting. So
we could talk about all of those. I agree, sir.
So we're gonna move on to Commissioner Shivers. You have a question?
So I wanted to sort of address the concerns I've heard in order, starting with Scott and saying that like we are putting a lot on our officers, and as we write policy, we cannot dictate the future. Kind of like Betsy was saying, this is part of a disciplinary rubric which the police auditor and the civilian review board can look at a specific incident that occurs and say, does this fall within policy? And so we're sort of trying to offer a guiding light on that front. And I do like the language that Betsy was talking about of, we encourage officers to exhaust de-escalation techniques to the full extent of their ability, and only resort to force when necessary. And we're not going to be the ones judging that. The CRB and the auditor will be, but I think that offers enough flexibility to offer that potential discipline without mandating discipline every time, because that's not the chair we sit in. I do think that when the CRB, when the auditor are looking at it and they see clearly, like they see language like clearly or should consider, that is not a reasonable metric for them to judge whether an officer did consider disengaging. They cannot tell what's clear to the officer. So that's why I'm objecting to that specific language as too watered down or too weak, is not because it's bad or even because it's an unreasonable standard, but merely because it cannot be used the way we need it to be used. And it's redundant with the objectively reasonable legal standard that's earlier in the policy.
Okay. Chief Skinner.
Just real quick, with respect to objectively reasonable, that is deeply rooted in Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, Graham versus Connor, when it comes to use of force. And so that's just, Scott, that's one of those things that has been a part of the landscape for law enforcement ever since Graham v. Connor and the Graham factors as it pertains to what's objectively reasonable around use of force. So that's why that gets thrown around, that term, is because it is, as Sean pointed out, it's a legal standard by which we measure all police action by, and more specifically, the grand factors. And you can look those up. There's a variety of those factors that help better understand whether certain course of action, specifically use of force, whether it is reasonable or not. So just one of those clarifications. It's not just something we kind of pulled together, or that Sean pulled together when he said objectively reasonable.
Next will be, and I have to say, again, dang it, I just do not like the idea of you leaving our commission, but Dr. Garcia, I appreciate you, and I like listening to you. You know often what you're talking about, and I look to you as an expert in some of the things that you say. So they're gonna have to bring somebody else that's bringing stuff to the table as you do. So go ahead and ask your question, but he's gonna be leaving us pretty soon, and that right there, I don't like. So I'm putting that out there. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chairman Boggs. There's no way I'll live up to that. But I just wanted to sort of chime in that the policy is something that has come up to the Civilian Review Board a couple times in the last, I think, year, and I think that the incorporation of the language from the ORS is helpful. One of the things that I have discovered in my time on the CRB when we've discussed the de-escalation policy is that my intuitive understanding of what de-escalation might mean as a layperson is not the same as how police departments understand it. And so I think that there's often like a little bit of a language disconnect. And so like when I look at this policy, and EPD's policy is not unusual in this sense, de-escalation is understood as a tactical set of techniques to avoid the use of force. Whereas I think in a lot of other contexts, and so I'm looking right now at the website of what is this? The Texas Medical Liability Trust, right? So in the context of hospitals, right, de-escalation is understood slightly differently, right? So, and I think this is, at least for me, a more intuitive kind of understanding that it's one technique that can be used when confronted with violent or aggressive behavior. It means transferring your sense of calm and genuine interest in what the patient wants to tell you by using respectful, clear, limit-setting boundaries, right? So that transferring of a set of calm, and I have seen this with EPD in some encounters where that's exactly what happens, where the tone of the voice lowers. There's a kind of a calm sense that then is hopefully transferred over to the person they're engaging with. But I don't feel like that spirit is captured in the very tactical sense of trying to maintain control over the situation, right? Trying to have a tactical advantage, trying to right. There's the way that I think I understand de-escalation, which is very much not a professional police officer sense, is a sort of disengagement. Although I think disengagement does in fact come up toward the end of the policy, if I remember correctly. Where was that? G, that's letter G. But so just to sort of go through the medical understanding, right? So be empathetic and non-judgmental, focus on understanding the person's feelings, whether or not you think those feelings are justified, they're real to the other person. If possible, stand 1.5 so we talk about distance. That's in the policy. Keeping tone and body language neutral. And I know that's part of the training. I'm not sure that's written directly into the policy. Remain calm, rational, professional. While you cannot control the person's behavior, how you respond to their behavior can affect whether the situation escalates or diffuses. Empathize with their feelings, not behavior, right? So I understand that you are, but it's not okay too, right? Focus on the thoughts behind the feelings. Ignore challenging questions, set boundaries, choose boundaries wisely, allow silence, allow time for decision. I know that, again, in the training, that slowing things down and creating time and space is a big part of it. So I don't think that they're completely different, but I do think that there is a different understanding of what de-escalation means in policing, where it's very much tied to the sense of dangerous encounters, where tactical advantage needs to be maintained and control needs to be asserted. Whereas I think in other professions, de-escalation is understood in a much more, for lack of a better word, touchy-feely way. And again, I'm not a police officer, so I don't know like if that's bridgeable, but I do think that the kind of the sense of de-escalation that I came into this with is probably more common among everyday people. Like that, when you hear the word, I think that's often how people think of it. And so I just want to sort of flag that sense that often I think there are different understandings of what the term means in these conversations. And so I'll just leave it at that.
No, and that's great. And what I want to do is segue this, right? Because you just finished. I want to hear Sergeant Brandon Raffke. What does de-escalation mean to you?
Hi, thank you. And thank you for having me. First off, I'd like to point out that the description you just heard is almost exactly what de-escalation means to us. And in fact, it mirrors most of the techniques that we teach in de-escalation. When we're approaching these things, we look at it from a sort of a crisis mindset, someone whose emotionality is overrunning the rationality in the brain. And the goal is to bring that back down. The methods that we use and the methods that we teach for those are deeply, deeply rooted in the therapeutic community as far back as like the 50s and 60s. Group therapy situations, it's the active listening skills, which are exactly what was just being described to you. I don't think there's not a disconnect. What we just heard, the descriptions that were just described to us are almost word for word the techniques that we're using: slowing things down, controlling the tone of our voice, giving people space to talk, asking open-ended questions so that people have the opportunity to get their issues and their voice heard, to get those emotions out. We do realize that the human mind only has so much chemical energy within it to stay in that incredibly heightened emotional state for so long. So if we can entice people to keep talking to us by maintaining some neutral body stances, using our body language to convey that we're listening, and employ these active listening skills. All of those things are exactly what we're teaching our officers, and what we use all the way up through to the most extreme suicide interventions, armed barricaded situations that our crisis negotiation team deals with. Those same techniques work on almost every contact that we make out on the street. So it's and to also roll back real quick, and then I'll be done here. There was a comment about not having officers need to be counselors or psychologists or whatnot. That's absolutely correct. That's not what we do. However, the advantage of using the active listening skills and the de-escalation techniques that are taught to the department is that they can be universally applied. While we don't need to know someone's specific diagnosis, if that may be the case, what we can do is recognize, is this possibly a mentally health related issue? Is this a substance issue? Is this just strictly a behavioral issue? So to be able to analyze that in real time, to assess that and speak to it as we're seeing it, is really what's being taught. And those active listening skills and the behavior change model is crucial to that.
And as you in action, and then what you're describing, a rookie would not know would not be at the same level as a person who has 10 years on the job.
True.
Because basically what I'm saying is that experience cannot be bought. It has to be earned. The more a person is a police officer, the more they will understand those skills. Because
I think so, yeah.
to ask
Sure.
a police officer to know all of that would not cause too many people to want to be a police officer. That's a lot on the plate.
It is a lot on the plate. What's nice is that the state academy has been building through their behavioral health programs. They've been increasing that training, the training hours that every officer in the state now is getting through a CIT type program. I know our department mandates that every officer goes through the CIT training, which is a huge benefit. But so from day one at the academy, officers are getting this type of training. So even a rookie cop that's just being cut loose out of a FTEP training already has, almost 2 years of this type of exposure in training and scenarios that they've been working through. But it does take a lot of time to practice and to become more proficient at.
Okay, so do we have any more questions on this subject matter? Because we need to move on to the vehicle pursuit. So Commissioner Wynn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question, I'm not sure if it's supposed to go to Lieutenant San Miguel, but maybe it is appropriate. So since many states don't mandate de-escalations, are lateral new hires from those states put through the same de-escalation training if there's a quantifiable answer to how many hours or whatever, if you can speak on that?
Yes, they do go through de-escalation training with us. We do require the 40-hour CIT course for all of our officers, including laterals. They do get some de-escalation in the Eugene Academy, and then they get a short 2-week academy at the state that I don't honestly know if it has much de-escalation in it, but they do get it with us. And then we again have in-service training monthly that, it gets incorporated in. So yeah, they do get it. And the 40-hour course is the big one.
Betsy, did you have another question?
No, I just have a comment.
Go ahead.
As a representative of the ad hoc committee, I feel that I was cut off and mansplained to. And I'm cool with that. I'm used to it. I'm a research scientist. I get mansplained to a lot. But I just would like the commission to know that when that happens, it doesn't put forth a good view that the police commission takes seriously the ad hoc committee and the time that we put in.
Did you have something further you needed to say? Did you have something further you needed to say?
I just said it.
Oh, okay. Dr. Garcia.
I just wanted to say thank you, Officer Rathje. It's great to hear that the incorporation of the techniques is more robust than my sense was in the trainings. I think my only remaining concern is that when I hear things described one way in the police commission and then it looks like it's defined differently in the CRB during CRB deliberations, partly because language is because of what language is in the policies. It's confusing to me. So I guess I would love for the description in the policy to match more closely the actual training that officers are receiving in de-escalation. I think that would just clear up confusion for me. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Garcia, I think I was thinking the exact same. Sorry to jump in, Chair Boggs, but I was thinking the same thing where, sometimes when we think about policies, we think about these largely being internal documents that kind of are guiding principles for our behavior. It's our playbook. But what sometimes we forget that sometimes they're also externally facing. in the sense that people want to go to those policies to have a better understanding of how we approach a particular situation. And in this particular case, it's occurred to me that we have a lot of techniques that I think are really, really in alignment with what this group would like to see us do, that are already happening, that if we just memorialize that those are important things to us in our de-escalation techniques, that it can be, from a public facing perspective, really illuminating on where our core values are around de-escalation. So I think your point is very well taken about the tactical mindset around de-escalation, because officer safety is such a huge priority for the men and women that serve this community. But I think there's maybe some additions that we can make to also memorialize the importance around some of the other aspects that you brought up. So probably one of the most valuable parts of this conversation has just happened right there with you, Dr. Garcia, and I appreciate that.
Commissioner Shivers?
Yeah, I'd just like to hear the chief and Julie talk about those suggestions to add exhaust, exhaust de-escalation before escalating, and to remove some of the clearly caveat language from some of those points.
Okay. Commissioner Lemons? And after you, we're going to the vehicle pursuit.
Sorry, let me, if we can't hear that, I move that we add to the policy exhaust all de-escalation before escalating. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Okay, so are you clear on what he's talking about, Sergeant Smith?
Oh, talking to me? Absolutely.
Where
So
are you?
to point 10,
John?
under 820.3.1, make it a 10th bullet point, I believe would be the best place. Additionally, we could make it a H, but I would consider either one of those a friendly amendment.
Sorry, isn't that technically though what it's kind of saying up in 820.3? Officers should make every reasonable effort to escalate confrontations to prevent the need to use force. To de-escalate confrontations, like every reasonable effort, isn't that basically exhaust?
If you want it to first.
That's fair.
Yeah. Does that satisfy you, Sean, Commissioner Shivers? Because I know I see where you're at. I mean,
yeah.
a lot of this is verbiage, but I think you're both trying to say the same thing.
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Okay.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Can we move to vehicle pursuit? Sergeant Smith, can you get us started on that?
Yes, thank you. So this policy came up for review because over the last couple of years, we added a new tactical team to the department, the street crimes unit, and we wanted to look at the policy to incorporate some guidelines in regards to the vehicles that aren't equipped with the full light bars and emergency equipment. And so we looked at the policy to incorporate that. At the same time, there was some interest from the lieutenants group and from the EVOX group to add further guidance in regards to enhancing and explaining when officers are authorized to initiate pursuit, to include additional language for circumstances regarding APA domestic violent type offenses. Although the previous policy covered felony type offenses, we felt that the developing domestic violence offenses that didn't rise to the felony level yet, but we're still you know, provided danger to the victim and the community. We wanted the ability for officers to know that in those circumstances that they could initiate a pursuit, keeping in mind that initiation of pre-authorization or initiation of those pursuits means that the officer still needs to take in the totality of the circumstances at the time. And if it's unsafe for them to continue the pursuit, they need to know that they have to terminate and not continue that pursuit if it's the safety outweighs the apprehension.
Excuse me, Sergeant Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that I let the group know that we have Officer Nathan Pesky, if I'm saying that correctly.
Correct.
Who's with the EVOC. And he deals with emergency vehicles. And so I'm gonna make sure that if anyone has any questions, that we also have another expert in the subject matter that we can ask. So we'll make sure. You can continue.
All right. And in fact, many of these points were added by Officer Pesky. So I'm glad that he's here to further discuss some of the aspects if you have questions. We also wanted to add the language in regards to forcible stops for wrong way drivers at controlled access highways and freeways. Also, inclusion of language for the deployment of technology, which would slow the speed of suspect vehicles and reduce the danger to community. Reestablish clear guidelines for supervisor responsibilities. We went away from just the general supervisor to actual designation of the watch commander or his or her designee. Added language and guidelines for pursuits extending into this jurisdiction from other police agencies. Our policy is a little bit more restrictive than some of our partner agencies, and so we wanted to provide guidelines when those come into our city. What is our role? And then added language to address accreditation standards for annual training and annual review of pursuits. And of course, revise for DEI gender inclusive language. So, Nate, do you have anything to add on some of those descriptions of things before they take questions?
Or would you, or you could field questions? What would you like to do?
Is that a question for me?
No, yes. So we have 3 hands up now. Would you like to speak prior to fielding some questions, or would you prefer fielding questions?
Just the amendments that we made to this policy were basically to assist officers in making competent decisions in rapidly evolving incidents, so they can act swiftly and make better decisions when it really counts. So we're hoping to simplify a lot of the processes and really underscore some of our intentions and the purposes of our pursuit policy.
Commissioner Wynn? B?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about 8814.3.1. I guess the sentence is all circumstances require risk assessment to ensure that a compelling government interest for apprehension of suspect outweigh the et cetera, et cetera. Should we use the word government instead of public interest in that? Again, it's 814.3.1.
When we talk about government interest, we talk about the interest of justice, the interest of making the arrest. Does the require risk assessment by knowing governmental interest for apprehension of suspect outweighs the potential? So that's the weight. Getting a bad guy in custody, is that more important than the dangerousness that we're going through in the apprehension process of this pursuit? If the answer is yes, fleeing, murder suspect, armed robbery suspect, those kinds of things where we know that if we don't capture them, we're actually putting the public at greater risk versus that. So that's kind of the way we talk about the governmental interest around that. It really is.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying, Chief, but also at the same time, I think that, in the end of what you're saying is circling back to public interest. So perhaps I would make a, motion that we change that word or add public and governmental interests instead of just governmental interest in that. Because the policy does talk about, the risk assessment of driving at high speed pursuit, not be able to catch a suspect, but putting the community at risk, right? So I think having that public interest added in there, I think that would make a little more sense.
You make a case. Would you like to make a motion?
Well, I mean, if we can just change it, then we don't need to.
I think you need to make a motion.
How about I make?
Okay, then let's do a motion. Anybody want a second?
Second.
I would like to speak against the motion because I think this is one of my soapboxes, so forgive me, but the government and the public are not separate. The government is a tool of the public in every way, shape, and form. That's how democracy is supposed to work anyway. So the government does not possess an interest in this matter. It is the public using the police officers to enact our interest.
So you're saying that you want to remove the government.
Yeah, I would say it's just a public interest.
And Commissioner Nguyen is saying use the government and add. Now his suggestion had a second. Now, do you have a second for yours?
I will actually.
Well, let me clarify if I may, Mr. Chairman. I first came up and said, let's take off the government part and add in
I like that.
Public interest. However, after hearing what Chief Skinner had said, I can see how, because we're in the end, the interest is going to be for the public safety, right? But if we're talking about, government being able to operate, if officers are consistently crashing their cars in pursuit, the government's going to be sued, not the public. But I agree with, I agree to some aspects of it is that in the end, we're the one who are paying the taxes, but it's all wordplay. We could either take out the word government or we can just leave it in there and add in front of that public / governmental interest.
Correct. That's what I was thinking that you were voting on.
Right. Either way is fine with me, but I just think that without having the word public in there, it doesn't rest well with me.
Okay, Commissioner Lemons.
Yeah, thank you. So as my friendly amendment, I would concur with both of the commissioners. And I would say we should put it public interest / government. So we are articulating our values. Thank you.
So beginning with public first and then / government.
Correct.
So now, do we have would you like to change your verbiage, or are we fine with that?
V, since you made the motion, do you agree that that's a friendly amendment?
Yes, I'm all right with that. Thank you.
Everyone's happy?
Could you restate exactly where that is and what the new sentence would read?
Okay. It would state all circumstances require a risk assessment.
What section?
Ensure that a compelling public / governmental interest for apprehension of suspect outweighs the potential risk to the public from the pursuit.
And that's 814.3.1.
On page 2.
814, page 2, 814.3.1.
Precisely.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, say no. Ayes have it. Okay, next. Do we have any more questions? Is there any more things that you're seeing that there's some verbiage we need to talk about? Commissioner?
I have a comment, especially since I'm so negative all the time. I feel like I'm always bringing up problems. I loved reading this policy. I read the earlier version, and I love the work that Julie and her folks have done on it.
Thank you.
Chair Boggs,
Yes.
please count me down as abstaining from the last vote.
Okay.
Oh, and me too, I guess. I didn't realize that for two of us.
There's two. So do we have any more hands?
Actually, since I'm the HRC liaison, should I abstain as well? I'm new.
You're fine.
Okay, all right, then I vote for yay. Thank you.
So we're now on.
Your hand's still up. Sean's hand's still up. Bad hand management.
Whoops, sorry about that.
Okay, so now we are at the part of our meeting where we're dealing with closing comments. We will begin with Commissioner Mogart.
One of the reasons why I abstained is because I'm really shocked. I'm shocked at the way that we treated our guest this evening. Betsy Davis was somebody who was supposed to be speaking on behalf of the ad hoc committee, a committee that I was a part of, a committee that did a tremendous amount of work. Sean interrupted her. And when she came in and said something in Dallas, it was really disrespectful in the way you responded to her as well. And I'm sorry that I feel this way, but we've never treated a guest like this. And it's shocking to me. That's not perfect. It's not.
My question is, what do you mean by mistreated her?
Well,
what I was telling her is she had said what was on her mind. She said it again, and she said it again, and said it again. I said we need to move on because we don't have enough time.
Fair enough. But you know, when she was brought here as a guest, which
correct,
you and I had the conversation in which we thought that we should have somebody from the ad hoc committees to speak on this issue, since we're still dealing with the ad hoc policies.
Correct.
You know, that those questions are brought to the sergeant, or those questions are brought to the chief. They're not brought to other commissioners.
Right.
It's really inappropriate for the commission to be stepping up and stepping in response to that stuff. So I'll leave it at that.
No,
and
I hear you 100%. Number one,
I appreciate that. But I think that in the future we need
I have a different view of what was going on, and maybe in the ad hoc committee, people can speak about a subject matter and go on for an hour or so. We have a lot of things we to get through. So I 100% heard her opinion. She said her opinion. She said it again, and she said it again. And I basically said, I hear your opinion, but we need to kind of move on to the next commissioner to speak. It's our commission. Yes, she was a guest, and I tried to do it as best as possible. If she's been offended, I apologize right now. If anyone,
it's not me that you're apologizing to, it would be her.
No, well,
but
she's
so
on, we can pass it on. But the bottom line is we have things that we had to go over.
Okay. There was a time allocated for that portion of the conversation, and it just was completely inappropriate the way it was laid out and went down. So I'll be finished with that.
That's fine. So is that your comment? Is that your comment?
It is, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So Commissioner Nguyen.
I was hoping that we could dive into the pursuit policy a little bit more, but I'm kind of surprised that we're done with it. I thought it's just a draft at the point, and we spent, I think, a whole 10 minutes on it. That was it.
Right. We could have continued, but there was no hands up. You see what I'm saying? I asked, is there any more comments on this? And there was no hands up. So I figured no one had anything to add to the table.
I do, but I just didn't want to, Mr. Chairman, I just didn't want to take up everybody else's opportunity to speak. That's the thing. I wanted to give other
There were no
folks.
hands. So why don't we do
Okay.
this? We just take a step back because we do have time. Is there
Okay.
something else on that you see?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
really appreciate the
Yeah,
opportunity.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I'm trying to find the section where it says supervisor, because I only took the part that I was going to talk on, but okay, I think it's 814.6 and 0.7 under communication. The part I didn't understand was where it says a pursuit must be terminated under any of the following conditions. And it says when directed to do so by a sworn supervisor, but then that's A, section A. But when you get down to section D, it says the officer is unable to effectively communicate with dispatch or a field supervisor or the other officers involved in the pursuit. So if they can't get in touch with communication and can't get in touch with their supervisor, then A is kind of moot, right? I'm guessing
I could be, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
I could be missing it because I'm not exactly finding it, but just right off the top of my head.
Okay.
Sometimes our radios we call it bonking. So if we're out of service or a pursuit ends up going out to like county, sometimes our radios are not going to transmit. Officers are aware when that happens, when our radios we're not able to effectively communicate. And I think that might be what it's hitting on, but maybe Sergeant Smith can kind of touch in on that too. But if we're getting a bonk, it's a audible noise that we'll hear. It lets us know that our radio is not functioning and our dispatch center is not able to catch what we're saying back and forth. So we automatically have to terminate that.
Okay. That makes sense now. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's pretty much the only thing that I can add right now.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has something about this specific policy that we need to address? Commissioner Dominguez?
Well, I was just wondering, so if you have the bonk thing and you're not able to communicate, does that mean that like the pursuit was transferred to the next jurisdiction or whatever it's called? Or like if you're pursuing somebody and then you're like out of range or whatever, like.
Yeah, so I can go ahead. No, you're fine, Navasha. If you want to answer it, go ahead.
I only had a little tidbit on that. It's obviously circumstantial as well, but if we're not being able to communicate, it then becomes a greater risk to us as well, because then we could potentially be in a deadly force encounter or something crazy like that, and nobody would be able to hear us. So then it's becoming our life on the line with no communication.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense.
And Bonnie, realistically, there are situations where we have pursuits that will start in the city that will go out into the county. Once we're in that other jurisdiction, generally speaking, that jurisdiction will join the pursuit. In the event that we can't communicate, then we will disengage and terminate our portion of the pursuit, and the county may continue with the pursuit because they can communicate based on that. So we technically terminate, but it doesn't mean the pursuit is terminated. If in fact the county jurisdiction has joined the pursuit, they would become lead car. We would terminate our active participation in that, just for our own safety, because we just, communication is kind of the cornerstone of safety for all of us, both directions. So.
Okay. Commissioner Lemons?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So just really quickly, so is the challenge of transferring communications a point of radio? Because from my experience, radio goes very far. Or is it because we are encrypting our communications?
It's not an encryption issue, Scott. It is the radio system for both Eugene and Lane County it operates on the same infrastructure, but it does have different towers. So for instance, the county owns equipment deep into the county so that they can communicate all the way up past Oak Ridge, for instance, based on the way their radios are programmed. If we took a Eugene police car and drove it up to Oak Ridge, we would be out of range of our primary tower, which is our repeater. It's a truncated system, so our system grabs the repeaters that it can find. And when we can't find the repeater, we can't communicate. The county has repeaters all over the county, and so they're able to communicate that way. The good news is, in the majority of the work that we do within kind of the Eugene proper area, is that our radios have the same channels on it, so that we are interoperable. As long as we're able to hit a repeater or hit a tower, we are interoperable. So really the issue only becomes in very, very rural settings. Or for instance, if we were in a pursuit out of Eugene and it's heading north on I-5, we're eventually going to run into Marion County. Well, first we're going to run into Lynn County, then we're going to run into Marion County, and we don't have any repeaters up there. So we would turn that over to them because they can communicate amongst themselves, and we can't. So it's just disparate systems sometimes get in the way.
See, thank you so much. And please let me know if there's a way that we can better communications across departments.
Commissioner Wynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I phrased my question a little differently than I really intended, so I apologize. So this is actually the part that I was a little confused with. On page 3, section D, I think that's still part of that same one that I was talking about, the pursuit of communication 814.7. I think that's page 7. So page 3 is further up. Is 814.3.2, when to terminate a pursuit. So D, where it says the officer is unable to effectively communicate with dispatch or a field supervisor, et cetera, you go down that page where it says upon termination of pursuit, the officer broadcasting the pursuit will advise dispatch. How do they do that if they don't have communication with dispatch?
They terminate the pursuit, and then when they come back in
phone.
range, they tell,
Oh.
yeah, they tell dispatch that the pursuit was terminated because they can no longer communicate, or they make a phone call and say,
Yes, with their cell phone, right?
Yeah, honestly, practically what would happen is if they were out of range and they can't get dispatch, they'd terminate and get on the phone and say, hey, dispatch, I just terminated. I can't communicate with you. So then dispatch knows that we don't have a guy or a gal still in the pursuit.
Okay.
So we get a little crafty about that.
Yeah, so use alternate communication, basically. Okay, thank you.
And it just, if I may, it feels to me like the perception is we have a very weak radio system and we can't communicate out in the county. Our radio system actually now works much better than it ever did before. And if you have an officer that's familiar with the area that they're potentially pursuing a suspect vehicle into, they can also advise our dispatch that they'll be operating on, say, LCSO channel 1, and they can switch over to their radio system and basically use their dispatch if it's important enough to continue the chase and pursue and apprehend that suspect. We can use alternate radio frequencies, and we can use repeaters from all over the county. We have that ability. So obviously there is the issue if we can no longer communicate, it becomes a safety issue and we need to terminate our involvement, but that's a pretty rare circumstance.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back now and we're going to continue and we're going to be on time. So we're going to go now to Commissioner Wynn for your closing statements.
I don't have any right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Dominguez.
I just wanted to say that during the protest, I appreciated that the police was there on top of it, blocking the street. So good job. That's all. Thanks.
Commissioner Zelenka. Excuse me, Councilor Zelenka.
No further comments at this time, Chair Boggs.
Commissioner Davis,
I don't have any closing comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Lemons.
Thank you, Chair. So I had alluded to earlier that I had a couple questions for Chief Skinner. Thank
Go ahead.
you.
Go ahead.
Skinner.
You can use your comments for a couple of questions. That's fine.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I wanted to say, I know there was some controversy about that TV ad, but the radio ad you did for EPD, like spot on. I thought that was amazing. I'm not in the position yet to suggest agenda items, but I would appreciate at least to know about what we are doing about downtown safety and collaborating with the downtown security guards. And then because we talked about it 2 meetings ago, I would really appreciate, and we might not have time here. So if in your opening comments next time, something about the progress of the recording, the audio recording with body cams, specifically related to EPD. So, thank you, and thank you all for seeing me. It's always good to see you.
Great. Dr. Garcia.
Yeah, it was great to have these two policies for discussion, and I thought that it was a good discussion. I did just want to say also it was very awkward to immediately follow the exchange with our guest, and I don't think that anyone intended any disrespect toward her, but I think that she definitely felt disrespected. That was clear. And I hope that the commission will reach out to her to attempt to repair that relationship.
Commissioner Shivers.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I look forward to talking to y'all soon.
So I went over my closing comments, and I believe we went over some good stuff right here. And I look forward to seeing you all next month in person. And I believe this will conclude our meeting tonight. Would anyone like to? We're done.
Oh, wait, I actually have a question. Sorry, I have a question. Okay, so I understand that we will be meeting next time.
Yes.
And just so you know, during the Citizens Academy starts at 6, and very often I am late because of work. So I still would like the option to maybe video in, because I sometimes work and it gets late. So it's going to be even harder for me to get to here to there. Just so you know, if it's at 5:30, that's like even harder for me. So
why don't you, me, and Holly, we'll get together. We'll figure out something. We'll figure something out.
Okay, great. All right, that sounds. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're done. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments.
Yes.